Hello, very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shanti. Coming up on our programme this week, inside Syria's worst humanitarian crisis, we speak to an NGO about the 1 million people displaced in Idlib by Russian bombardment. Panic hits global markets amid the COVID-19 threat and oil prices plummet. This as the outbreak continues to deepen around the world. Also on our show this week, for the first time, Lebanon defaults on its debts. This marks a new phase in a crisis that has hammered the country's economy since October. Thank you for watching Middle East Matters. We start with the humanitarian crisis fast unravelling in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. According to the United Nations, over the past 3 months, almost 1 million people have been displaced by a military offensive at the hands of Russia. Now, a displacement of this scale in such a short time is reported to be unprecedented since the Syrian conflict started 9 years ago. NGOs say camps are overcrowded and water and sanitation facilities are inadequate for the large numbers of people. Now, for more on this story, I'd like to welcome Gwen Young to the programme. She's the Managing Director of the Global Emergency Response Coalition, and she joins us from Washington, D.C. Gwen, thank you so much for being with us. Just how bad is the situation on the ground? Various NGOs and organizations are actually planning to step up both medical assistance and aid distributions from what we're hearing.
The situation is horrifying. We are appalled. We're an alliance of the leading humanitarian NGOs. We've been there since the crisis began in 2012. And what we're seeing on the ground is simply horrifying. Children are freezing on the streets. People are living on the streets. There is no food and water. And it's 2020. So what we're really asking is for people to step up and take action and pay attention. This large-scale movement, the rapidity of it, the pace of it, comes on top of, as you said, almost a decade-long war and very, very strained humanitarian systems.
And Gwen, presumably access for NGOs and medical care workers has been a challenge.
It has been a challenge. You have to remember that many of the international NGOs work with local NGOs, partners on the ground. The humanitarian personnel themselves are displaced. They're working in situations that are strained with little resources and under threats of violence. So it's very, very difficult, even for those trying to deliver aid, trying to help and work with those most urgent in need to save lives. It's a very, very horrific situation.
It's a horrific situation, and one health worker on the ground has spoken about this global panic that we're currently facing with COVID-19. Yet in Idlib, he said, residents are actually faced with more challenging diseases that perhaps the international community is turning a blind eye to. What are your thoughts on that statement?
Well, my thoughts on that statement is when people are living on the streets, when they're, over 80% of the people that are displaced are not living in formal camps. Even if they were in the camps are already overcrowded. So they're living without proper water, without proper food, without proper hygiene. So you have all the host of diseases, not the least of which is malnutrition. As I said, it's cold and people are freezing on the ground, but you've got a series of waterborne diseases, and you have no medical centers. You have 84 closing last week in and of themselves. So you have really little medical personnel and little help for these people on the ground. So diseases like cholera can spread very rapidly. People with acute and emergency diseases do not simply have healthcare workers that can see them. So it's pretty terrifying on the ground for these people that are suffering from a range of diseases.
You just mentioned problems with water, food, hygiene. Let's now talk about the displaced themselves. Reports are that over 80% of them are women and children.
Yeah, 560,000 of them are women and children. And one thing you have to remember is that since they're not in formal situations, they also don't have schools, and there's not a lot of safe places for these women and children to be. And we just found out from one of our member NGOs that 20% almost of women in the camps themselves, and just the camps, are lactating and pregnant women. So you've got this very complicated situation that, in addition to safety, in addition to disease and healthcare, as we've just talked, you've got extreme mental anguish and extreme psychological damage that can happen to these women and children.
Gwen, what measures does your organization suggest be taken to try and help this fast unraveling crisis?
Since we have leading 7 NGOs in this case, we can cover a gamut of things, but we do a lot of safe spaces for children. We do protection work. We do a lot of psychosocial support for both children, women, and men, so the people living in the camps, the people living in the streets. We do healthcare. We do cash assistance. And we do general provision of services to try to help build shelters and try to create a stable situation for temporary. You have to remember that some of these people have moved 2 or 3 times as well. So what we're trying to do is provide all the support they need, not just from shelter, but to the psychosocial angles, which includes trying to set up smaller education centers where children can actually play. One of our NGOs was saying, when you ask children what they want right now in Idlib, what they want is they want to have friends, they want to feel safe. And they want to play with their friends. And of course, they want to go to school. So they want to be in a situation where they're not feeling like bombing is a normal occurrence. They're going to have to move, and they're not feeling entirely uncertain as to what they will see tomorrow morning.
Gwen Young of the Global Emergency Response Coalition, thank you so much for speaking to us here on Middle East Matters at the time when the future of the residents of Idlib, of course, continues to hang in the balance. Now to a story dominating the headlines across the world. Monday saw the biggest plunge in the price of oil since the Gulf War in 1991, sending tremors through battered global markets. The trigger for much of the market panic was an OPEC meeting in Vienna last Friday that ended without an agreement and which prompted Saudi Arabia to slash prices. It did so to punish Russia for ditching its alliance with OPEC.
A dramatic plunge in the oil price as the OPEC Plus alliance with Russia falls apart. Saudi Arabia slashed its price for crude, saying it would increase output starting on the 1st of April after a bust-up with Russia overproduction. An about-turn from Riyadh, which just last week was trying to convince Moscow of the need for production cuts.
OPEC and Russia, these 2 major oil producers, they can't agree to cut down the output in order to shore up price. Instead, they choose to do the opposite. So this will definitely lead to an oversupply situation in the oil market, and the price can fall even more from here.
Saudi Arabia is gambling it will win market share in what many analysts are calling a price war. The massive rout spread to equities markets. Trading floors were a sea of red. They were already under strain over COVID-19 uncertainties.
We will have a big market correction of at least 20% globally. So buckle your seatbelt and hang tight because it will be a rough ride. It will be a roller coaster ride.
Among the biggest losers in what's being called Black Monday were oil companies. Investors turned to safe havens such as gold and to the Japanese yen. The gamble by Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, to spark a price war could backfire. Riyadh can produce oil far more cheaply than its rivals, but given its reliance on oil revenues, it may not be able to afford a long-term low oil price.
Turning our attention to Lebanon, where on March the 7th, the country's Prime Minister Hassan Diab announced that his country would not repay a $1.2 billion debt. This as the Middle Eastern nation's economic crisis deepens. France 24's Catherine Viette brings us up to speed.
$1.2 billion. That's the amount of the payment the Lebanese government was supposed to make on Monday. But for the first time in the country's history, it will default on its sovereign debt payment. With the country in the midst of a major financial crisis, the new prime minister addressed the nation on Saturday.
Our reserve of hard currencies has reached a critical and dangerous stage, so the government will suspend its debt payment on Monday, because these funds are necessary to provide basic goods to the Lebanese people.
With debt more than 80 billion euros, or about 170% of GDP, Lebanon is one of the world's most indebted countries. The Prime Minister has promised to restructure this debt and carry out a series of reforms against waste and corruption. Officials have already asked the International Monetary Fund for advice and technical assistance. The Lebanese pound has lost 40% of its value over the past few months, and there are fears it will slip lower yet. In response, the government has limited the amount account holders can withdraw from banks. The ongoing financial crisis is considered to be the greatest risk to the country's stability since the end of the civil war 30 years ago. It's triggered mass demonstrations and forced the resignation of several government officials.
Now, going back to COVID-19, earlier we spoke about the economic fallout of the disease. Now, in the region, Saudi Arabia has banned pilgrimages to the holy city of Mecca, while Iran has cancelled Friday's Islamic prayers in major cities for a second week in a row. But one event went ahead in the UAE, and that's the 9th edition of the Middle East Film and Comic Con. Yanali has more.
These masks might not be quite like those recommended by health authorities. Comic book fans around the Middle East dressed up as their favorite characters and convened in Dubai, despite fears of COVID-19.
I always wear a mask because I would prefer to have my identity as a secret. Coronavirus does not make me scared. That's why I came here to Comic-Con, because I know and I believe that this event is ready and prepared for this issue.
Organisers raised awareness about hygiene and provided hand sanitizers, and some participants came with extra protection.
I was worried, especially since my mother repeatedly told me, don't go, don't go, don't go, please don't go. And if you will go, at the very least, take precaution, which is why I'm wearing 2 layers of gloves, as you can see.
Attendees chose precaution over panic, and the coronavirus didn't dampen the mood. Created in 2012, the Middle East Film and Comic Con attracts thousands of visitors. This year, several big names such as Mena Massoud from Aladdin and Superman's Brandon Routh were on the red carpet. Conferences, contests and cosplay for participants a welcome respite from coronavirus worries.
Well, that's it from us this week. Thank you for watching.